No one's ever painted my name outside of my kids. So thanks for having me. It's a great honor to be back with you at Plywood. How many of you are anticipating this is going to be an amazing time together these next 24 or 36 hours? Well, I want to kick it off by talking to you a little bit about the notion of creating a culture of innovation. Not just hiring innovative people, but this understanding that it takes a culture to really innovate, and innovation soon you'll see is a necessity for succeeding in our culture today. How many would agree that there is a ton of brand clutter out there? There's a whole lot of noise that surrounds your work, my work, and it's very easy to get lost in the white noise of what's happening all around our world, especially online. And what I want to kind of frame for you is this understanding of brand really briefly, and then I'm going to dive into innovation, is that the way that brands usually work is it's not so much what you say your brand is, it's really what people feel when they come across any touch point with whatever you're doing. So in every human being, there are these mental categories we create where we put brands inside of them. Whether it's an airline, an MP3 player, whether it's a TV, whether it's a particular restaurant of a particular type of food. And it's incredibly difficult to remove another brand from that mental category unless you create something incredibly remarkable. Isn't that true? So what a lot of companies are doing is they're either extending a category or creating new categories. In your case, many of you are quote-unquote social entrepreneurs. You're entering a brand new space that very few people have intentionally identified themselves with. And it's a growing industry. So in the midst of that, there are multiple subcategories within that. And if we're not careful, we can get kind of lost in the clutter. And it's not so much that you beat out another social entrepreneur. It's really more this understanding that you have to be clear about who you are, what you're doing, and why you exist, so that you can add value to all the other maybe sister companies or organizations that you want to partner with in the long run. And through it all, hopefully everybody will pursue becoming a charismatic brand. This is what Marty Neumeier, pretty much a brand guru, he talks about. He says, a charismatic brand is a product, service, or organization for which people believe there's no substitute. The idea that if your company or organization were to cease to exist tomorrow, would anyone miss it? Or would anyone say, hey, we miss company X that was started by Mark, so we need to fill it with someone else because it's met a lifestyle need in my life, and it's become an integral part of the way I do life in my community. So I want to talk to you a little bit about innovation because here's the reality. No company will outpace the culture or a particular market. We're all going to feel behind to a certain level. I've talked with companies that were both multi-$1,000 companies to multi-billion-dollar well-known brands. And one thing, the commonality in everyone is everyone feels behind because the world is moving so quickly. But here's the truth. Companies that are being really impactful and successful today are committed to being innovative. And what do I mean by innovation? What I mean by innovation is I think innovation has two main components. The first part has to do with the ability to clarify a problem. Sometimes, isn't it true that you hear some organizations and companies and you're like, man, they're trying to solve a problem that doesn't really exist outside of their own imagination. And it's possible that this part is, it deals with like problem-solving skills and so forth that you'll hear about throughout the next 24 hours. But the clarification of a problem, and the other one is designing a solution that actually works and doing the hard work of not only being inspired or passionate about an idea, but actually implementing it. Here's the good news, though, and I think common misperception is somehow you have to look like this in order to be an innovator. When in actuality, if you look at all the great innovators throughout history, they look like everyday people. Do you guys know who this is? Well, you should know him because he created the World Wide Web, Tim Berners-Lee. So it's this understanding but he was trying to solve something, a management filing system that he wanted to take it kind of global, and he did. So it's not about a look. You don't have to be the most well-dressed, or I know we're in Buckhead, so there's a lot that comes with that. Okay, lots of good and some not so, but It's the understanding that, look, if we are solving problems in which Plywood People is about, you're an actual innovator if you produce something. So let me give you some 5 quick keys on how companies are actually innovating and creating a culture. One is innovation starts with vision. And what I mean by this is the talk of innovation has to have a seat at the leadership table, at the executive table. It has to have a seat at the C-level suite, if you will, of executives that are talking about innovation. It's very little about hiring the right innovator. Rarely does one person change the culture of a company. Can you speak into it, add value to it? Absolutely. But it has to be at the highest level of any company or organization. So whether it's you and a friend and a startup, or whether you're a part of a 1,000-employee company, it has to be a conversation that's actually taking place at the top, where people are discussing ways of creating a better culture of innovation. And it's really about managing stories. And part of this is visionaries often in a lot of these innovative companies view themselves as managers of stories. Their role is to tell the story of the values and really the vision of the company through everyday conversation, the way that directors speak to managers and managers speak to direct reports. It's this understanding that it's managing the story, whatever story, and hopefully it entails this notion of innovation. So it's very little about an annual report or an annual, production where we say, this is what our company is about. It's really those in-between moments, the hallway conversations, the way you do quarterly reviews. All those little moments are great opportunities to tell the story of innovation. So it starts at the top. Innovation also welcomes a new kind of thinking. What I mean by this is traditional thinking says that if you know how to do something, you do it. So if you want to figure out what to do next, what do? You go back to the memory bank to figure out what people have done. Has anybody ever worked for a company where you go up to your supervisor and you're like, hey, I have this new idea of doing X, Y, and Z, and their response is, they respond with a question. Has anybody ever done this before? Which means they're stuck in a type of thinking, a kind of thinking that says, we're going to do what we've always done. Well, a new kind of innovative thinking is creating space, sometimes quite literally space, or time or budget to allow people to spend a little bit of energy in diverging into potential options. So it may be that, maybe you have a particular project cycle in your company where you have to deliver at a certain point. Can you integrate some elements into it that give people space to think about alternative options? And a lot of companies are starting to engage this type of thinking. Remember this company? Remember bookstores? They're still around to a large extent, but the business model was a little bit, it started to catch up with it because in a bookstore, often you order the books from the publishers, and it takes usually anywhere from 6 to 9 months to actually sell the inventory. And so there's a lot of money you're paying up front. And so another company came along and said, hey, let's speed up that process, and let's actually charge the customers first through this thing called the internet, right? And that way, then we'll order from the publishers, and we may fulfill it or they may fulfill it, and then we'll get it to our customers. And what they did was they diverged from the way it had always been done. And they spent a significant amount of time in R&D and logistics to figure out how they can disrupt a system. And many of you in here by nature are disruptors anyway. Remember a Blockbuster? Right? What came along after Blockbuster? Yeah, Netflix and now Redbox, right? Part of Blockbuster's model was they banked on the fact that we would turn videos and DVDs in late. Anybody ever do that? Yeah, I never told my wife the truth, but it would often be like, yeah, sure, I returned it on. But they were banking on this. So when Netflix came along and got rid of the late fees, it wasn't a threat to them in their business model, because that's not the way that they had structured their business. But little did they know that people were willing to give up a convenience for the sake of a better deal and less penalty when a DVD was returned later. And now we have services like Redbox, where you can literally get it today at $1 a day. So they've broken it down to per day rentals. But this idea that all of these companies paused And they could have gone down the route that everybody else had gone down, and yet they chose to diverge. But in order to do this, you really have to create culture. It's nice to have a creative or innovative person in the room that's known for their innovation. But outside of that, what's sustainable is culture. Because what if that person leaves, right? And so here are some ways that it scales with culture. In an ideal scenario, I think it starts with vision. Vision should breed culture that breeds innovation, that breeds growth, and ultimately value to the customer. And unfortunately, because of the rush and the reactive nature of short-term return, companies will always struggle because they will emphasize, they may do every so often focus on number one, vision, but the bulk of their energy is spent on numbers 4 and 5, which is more about more products, more services, and they keep adding features to what they offer in hopes that it will increase value to the customer. It's great. You may increase value to the customer short term, but here's some of the consequences of just focusing on 4 and 5. You're going to lose talented people. People rarely stay in companies because of just the growth and value that it's producing. A lot of them stay because of the culture of innovation that surrounds a particular company or organization. But culture and innovation takes time. It's not just the right hire, it's reframing the way that the culture works within the life of a company. It forces us to actually start connecting silos within the company and start to really leverage the talent that's already internal. There's a good chance that for many, even mid-sized companies, especially, and also large-sized ones, is that they're missing out at a talent pool because they've already segmented who can do what in a very clear kind of manner. But here's the way that creativity often works as it relates to innovation. You may have one idea, and then you work on it for a little bit, and then you have another idea, another idea, another idea, another idea. Pretty soon your spouse says, "You're just full of ideas, aren't you?" Right? Anybody relate? I see people nudging people they're sitting next to. But what happens over time is seemingly unrelated ideas start to connect. And maybe a couple ideas connect with the third one and with the fourth one. And there are these magical moments where these ideas actually all come together. This happens departmentally too within companies. It's companies that are able to kind of leverage the expertise not only in different areas, but allow people to move outside of what they're expected to do, to allow them to bring in some of the other hidden talents they may have or skill sets they never get to use in their current position, benefit greatly by contributing to the overall vision or formation of a company. Companies are starting to create these innovation centers, whether they're virtual or real space, where people can share some of the best practices for problem solving, some of the best ideas that are shared internally in a platform that makes sense for the company, depending on the size and so forth. Companies like Toyota have done a great job of not only externally promoting the fact that they are innovative, but they have idea competitions and innovation competitions and so forth that any employee can participate in. And the idea for them is they feel like they need to kind of extend or expand the scope or the pathways through which they can receive ideas. In the same way that if a company like Starbucks is committed to hearing new ideas from its customers, it has created a chain of command in which a customer can tell a barista, that can tell a manager, that can tell headquarters and so forth about a new way of doing business. So they've intentionally created pathways and systems where they can actually even listen to people effectively. But innovation also is an embracer of process and metrics. It's not just pie in the sky creativity. And the idea is think big, right? Start small, but here's the key, keep moving. Some people just think big. Some people start small and then stop, right? And the idea is think big, start small, and keep moving your ideas forward. And a big part of this is in the book, The Lean Startup, and many of you have probably read it, it's this notion of continually reiterating whatever it is that you're working in or working on. And the idea is build it, measure it, learn from it, rebuild it, measure it, learn from it, keep reiterating. It may feel circular, but in actuality, it's more like a spiral. Every time you do it, you're getting it a little bit better. And so in the real world, the idea is that you can have a great business plan, but you should treat your business plan more like a Google Doc, where you can edit it. It should be a living document of the trajectory or the path in which your company hopes to go. And so continually thinking in terms of like, how can we make it better? Like in Toyota, they have a somewhat of, I'm paraphrasing, of the statement of like you gotta aim and achieve perfection and then make it better. It's a culture where they're like, yeah, we're gonna make it like quote unquote perfect, but we're actually gonna make it even better afterwards. And the idea is like, let's keep it open. It's less about putting nicely polished plaques of mission statements on the wall. It's more about saying, look, we're an open book, and we need everybody to contribute at the appropriate levels, and we're going to keep moving this forward and keep shaping it as we enter the future. And you can do it in a way that minimizes risk. I mean, here's a simple sample of, like maybe if it's a new concept and you're trying to figure out whether it's going to work, don't bet the whole farm on it. Make a small bet. Spend a little bit of time on it. Make a bigger bet. Maybe hire a consultant or two, or meet with specialists or experts in the field and invest in that. If it looks feasible, do more of an experimental launch that's known to be experimental, right? If Google is still in beta, right, I think it gives us permission to be in process. And fourthly, then if it's large enough where you feel like it's actually going to work, go for it. Then you're like really figuring out how to risk less, right? And figure out ways that are smart to see if the idea actually works. And designing new metrics. I mean, companies for years have figured out, some companies measure innovation by how many patents they file, or who they're hiring, what kind of interview questions they're asking, what kind of new product lines are developed, how much, some companies are dedicating outside of the general budget, just R&D budget, no matter what size it is. So you can actually experiment at permission and time and budget to experiment, to keep working at those ends, to say innovation has to be embedded into the life of our company. And doing things like this, where you start with vision and you create a design, a solution, you try it out, you assess it, and not only pick out things that went wrong, but actually pick out things that went well, celebrate those, and learn from the very people who led those portions of the project. Have them share about how it worked, and learn and create a cycle of continual improvement on a team. And this could be a short meeting, quite honestly. It can be short celebration. It doesn't have to be heavy budget. But it creates an environment in which people say, we know whatever we finish, we're going to actually, quote unquote, finish, evaluate, re-engage, and keep making it better and better and better. And lastly, innovation needs space for both this collaborative experience of new ideas and implementing new solutions, and space for me. Here's the thing about like brainstorming. Brainstorming meetings are great, but not highly efficient. Most of the time, many companies like managers or supervisors will have an idea. They've sat on a question or problem for weeks, if not months, and often they show up to a meeting and just dump it on the rest of the team, expecting some profound ideas to come back. Unfortunately, if statistics are true, a good chunk of your workforce are introverts. They're not necessarily going to respond right there on the spot. And studies have shown recently from Harvard that, if you have a 60-minute brainstorm meeting, the best, like the 75 to 80% of the best ideas come in the first 30 minutes, because people start losing it a little bit in a brainstorm meeting. And so the idea is, like, can we be a little bit more efficient? Are there ways to ramp up brainstorming where people can independently work on problems and bring it to a meeting? And then you have some action steps that kind of follow. Once again, you're providing not just a culture of innovation, but a culture of different ways of communication, learning, sharing ideas. This is a cultural issue. I guess that's the point of my talk. And allowing people to breathe and be by themselves. Some of the most creative work happens when you're by yourself, actually, as much as some of the best ideas come out when you're collaborating, and that whole creativity dots that I showed you that start to spark. Those are great, but we all need time to breathe. And be slow about sharing new ideas. Take your time. My recommendation is write it down, because if you don't, studies have also shown that if you are quick to share an idea over and over again, you are less likely to actually implement them, because it tricks your mind into thinking you're actually doing something about the idea by talking about it. And you're like, I know that guy, right? Writing it down gives you clarity, a point of reference. It allows you to really pinpoint exactly what you need to do next. It's an action-leaning type of endeavor. And fun is great. I think fun is an integral part of actually innovating well. The more shared experiences you can do, the more things that you can do where there is a lot of laughter, and even like competition, those have been shown to be very effective in sparking innovation and problem solving. And here's the good thing is, if you create a culture of innovation, people are going to want more problems to solve. And it kind of creates a snowball effect where people expect to solve great problems. That's how you start creating a culture of innovation. Thank you.
I have one follow-up question for you.
Yep.
You talked about just kind of a culture of innovation. One thing I've been noticing is that there's more and more cultures that people are challenged in trying to create in their organization around generosity. And like, I know there's an organization on the West Coast called Sevenly that's thinking about this. And I mean, the greatest limitation oftentimes for organizations is keeping great people, and this might be one of the new aspects of keeping people. What advice do you have to create a culture of generosity?
I think generosity, I guess it goes into the overall like value of a company, is that if you work for a company that is, one, generous or invites you to be generous, I think that feeds into the type of company that most people want to work for. You know, my wife works for a pretty large brand, but she says sometimes in her day-to-day job, she doesn't feel like it necessarily is connected to a specific purpose that she really resonates with. So I think generosity is a great, like, practical way for employees and employers to create a healthy culture. And generosity is a great opportunity to be really innovative about how a particular company engages, especially in the area of social good, right? So,
have you heard any creative new approaches in that recently?
I think Sevenly is a great example. I don't know if you guys know, but Sevenly, basically, they pick one, they're apparel making company that picks one organization, nonprofit, a month, and they pretty much create a product for them, and they just do a sale for a month where $7 from every product goes to the organization. And I think after the first year, they're already at something like a year and a half, like 5 million, gave away over 2 million towards nonprofits. And so they've created a really great model. But if you look at Sevenly, their culture within the company is really committed to, like, they have a slogan that says people matter, right? So they're really committed that they're not just giving away, but internally they work of creative ideas to keep everybody engaged in all of the problems, the way they tell stories of each organization. It's like a whole company effort. But they work with 52 organizations a year.
It's a lot,
which is intense environment to work with, but they do it because the heart of generosity kind of stands core to what they do.
Well, I really appreciate Charles. This is his book we have in the back. It's Good Idea, Now What? If you wrote down a ton of notes and want to learn more, I really highly recommend this book.